Welcome back to Gabversity, where facts do not care about your feelings. Today is the lecture I have been warning about for quite a while, and that lecture is on, you guessed it, Miss Bombshell. It's not on Miss Bombshell, it's on climate change. And I said it's coming, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So here is everyone, and welcome aboard. So what I've done is I have collated 3 separate articles. One of them is provided by the university, right? Which is hilarious because the first, the title, hello, Ms. Bombshell, the title of the university lecture is why are people denying climate change despite so much evidence? Now that's already, right, not going to convince anyone because that shows the agenda. So that's interesting, right? So that's one. I'm going to leave that till last. The first article I've got is one from a conservative article, which I thought would be great to start with. The second one is from a pro-science climate change, right? And then the third one will be the university. So let's begin. This is going to be fun. Remember, facts don't care about our feelings, and I'm happy to look at all the evidence, all right, and just see what's going on. So scientists who argue for global warming being real base most of their evidence on this. This one is from conserve-energyfuture.com. Okay. They base their evidence on interpretation of the change in the level of gases in the atmosphere and the ocean. All right. The actual warming of temperature is something they say they can document. But the primary evidence is drawn from detecting what precedes a temperature rise. Boss Briggs. The change and effect of atmospheric gases on Earth's environment. This is interesting because you're going to see, this is Gabversity, right? Where we look at all of them. I don't care, everyone's agenda. And then we're going to go to the university lecture, which is 100% biased in one way, right? So, and that doesn't mean they're wrong, by the way. That does not mean they're wrong. My personal opinion is that climate change is quite obviously real, but I'm going to look at all the arguments, and we're going to go through all of the pluses and minuses as much as we can see, because anyone could be wrong. You don't know, right? And you've got to have that position as a scientist. You can't walk in and say, I know, or I think this is right, or I'm here to convince anyone. No. The only person you can convince is yourself. So here we go. This is argument number 1, rise in sea level. And this is supposedly, according to conserve-energyfuture.com, right? These are the arguments supposedly against climate change. So let's go through them and let's know the arguments. Why not? It's important to know both sides. I'm not interested in these idiots who want to put someone down just because they have a different opinion. That annoys me. All right. So sea level is rising in many areas of the world. This is partially attributed to the melting ice caps and glaciers. Let's do it. But more to the changes in the gases contained within the sea. In the past decade, the global mean sea levels have doubled compared to the 20th century trend of 1.6 millimeters per year. All right, so instead of 1.6 millimeters per year, it's now going 3.2 millimeters per year. Okay, so that's the rise in sea level rate. The global sea levels rose 6.7 inches in the last century. All right, that's argument number 1. Argument number 2, rise in Earth's average temperature. All right, so global temperature rise during the past century and a half continues. Tracking global atmospheric temperature since the 1800s, scientists point to a steady rise with a stronger period in the 70s, a lull in the 90s, and a return to the rising pattern in the 2000s. Argument number 3. So this doesn't help. This is not for or against as of yet. All we're looking at is actual data. Right, and no, we have not yet reached a conclusion as to what this data is attributed to. Right, we're just looking at the data. So, rise in ocean temperature is argument number 3. The rise in the number of vehicles and industries has resulted in greenhouse gases getting trapped in the atmosphere. The increased heat in the atmosphere, they wrote have, it should be has, been absorbed by the oceans. There is over 50 years of documented temperature records for the oceans that have recorded a steady rise in its temperature since 1969. Okay, fair enough. So they're arguing, if you missed that one, they're arguing that the heat generated from these greenhouse gases from supposedly from the cars that have been created, number of vehicles and industries, is now getting absorbed by the ocean. Okay. Argument number 4. Okay. The glaciers on several mountain ranges, especially in Greenland and Antarctica, are decreasing in size due to reduction in gases that help to maintain temperatures and changes in the region's climate. All right. Studies conducted by NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment show Greenland lost up to 60 cubic miles of ice every year between 2000 and 2006. So far this is just data, right? This data does not sway anyone either way. The data just means that's what's happened in that time period. All right. So that would be, I would say, objectively a scientific way to look at that so far. All right. Next one, ocean acidification. Acid level in the ocean is increasing. Hey, Texas Fred, which is making the oceans of the world more acidic, supposedly. Okay. This is due to emission of more harmful gases in the atmosphere. So they're saying that this is due, according to the science, right? And we can take it at face value for now, right? But we're just taking what they say. This is due to emission of more harmful gases in the atmosphere by humans, which is getting absorbed by the oceans. This is resulting in an increase of algae blooms and mass fish deaths, as well as a change to the chemical composition of the water. Okay, so this here is slightly unscientific, because what they've done, and it's completely sulfur dioxide, yeah, absolutely, it's completely legitimate what they're saying, right? But to look at it scientifically, right, there is no citation, right? And that does not mean it's wrong, by the way. By the way, be very careful, because so that people know, I'm actually a proponent of climate change, right? Me personally. But that's irrelevant, right? When it comes to Gabversity, we're looking at the data itself, as I've said before. Okay? So how to understand data. The data is, right, there are 3 pieces of data here, right? Number 1, pieces of datum, sorry. Okay. Number 1, the acidic level in the ocean is increasing. Okay? Okay. It's increasing. It doesn't say why. That's increasing. Number 1. Number 2, all right, there are increased emissions of harmful gases in the atmosphere by humans. Okay, so those 2 are facts. Okay, now what they've done here is they've linked them together. They say that the acidic rise in the sea level is due to that. Now that could very well be true, but you don't get that from this article, right? And it's all about critical thinking of a particular article. Okay, and there is also an increase of algae blooms and mass fish deaths. Now the question is, what is the chance that those 3 are unrelated? Okay, that's a question you have to ask yourself, and we don't have the answer in this particular article. The question is, they've all happened at the same time. Is it a coincidence? We don't know the answer yet, right? We're still going through it. Okay, many scientists make a strong case against global warming being real. They often look towards the same evidence as those in favor for proving its existence. Yeah. See, that's exactly what we were just saying, right? Both sides of the argument are using the same data. That's the actual argument. See, when you watch anyone biased on either side, right? People then assume that the other side does not understand their position, right? Or is using different data. Right? So this is an interesting point, and this is what I think. I think that both sides are using the same data, but how they analyze it is different. All right. So they draw different conclusions. And if you guys remember, as I've said in my GabSmack channel, conclusions are subjective. The data is objective. Okay. Karen AZ, welcome back. Lovely to see you. All righty. So these scientists, right, hold to strict definition of global warming as being defined as a rise in atmospheric temperature. They do not consider the atmospheric precursors as valid evidence. Hello, lovely. Hope things are going well with your husband. All right. Scientists, here we go. Now, here are the arguments. Has to be correct. They can't both be correct. Right. I would say, I would agree with you 80%. I would say that there could be a small amount of truth on one side and most of the truth on the other. but yes, I would say in general, I'm with you on that. Okay, so these are now, they could both be wrong. Yes, which would be, both of you would be correct in the sense that they might not be completely right or completely wrong. So yes, that's correct. So we've just heard now the data, right? That was just the data. Now we're going to look at the arguments by the 3%, by the 3% of the scientists, supposedly, according to this site, that are against or denying, climate change, right? So here are the arguments. Have you seen the movie Cowspiracy? I haven't, but it doesn't sound like a movie I would see. I don't watch movies at all, actually. It sounds funny though. All right, so here we go. Scientists who argue against global warming say global warming isn't real because, yeah, I figured, yeah, with all the methane from cow farts. Yeah. Since the 90s, there hasn't been a significant temperature change. These are the arguments we're reading now. The upswing in the temperature started from 1975, continued until 97, and then the temperature has been flat since then, which clearly states that there isn't significant change in the temperature in the last 17 years. So this is supposedly argument number 1 out of 5 from the scientists against global warming. Next, not enough historical data available. There is no consensus about global warming being real among scientists, supposedly. Right? This is according to this argument here, right? Even though it admits in the previous argument that 97% do concede that it is real. Advocates also point towards the fact that a recent gathering of 31,000 scientists, Helen, in the field of environmental scientists could not reach a consensus on whether or not global warming is real. They believe that they don't have long-term historical climate data, or the data they have isn't clear. Hey. So that's argument number 2. And we're going to break down these arguments as well. Is the largest by far number 1 contribution to climate change. There's a guy from Rhodesia to some data volcanic eruptions dwarf all of our historical. Yeah, I've heard all of those. Yeah. Look, these are all valid points to definitely go through. It's beautiful that we can have this discussion. That's why Gabversity, that type of thinking should be everywhere, as opposed to people devolving into their ideological biases, which is just ridiculous. There's a guy called Savory, I think it's Dr. Alon or Alan Savory. He's from Rhodesia, and he actually was able to turn deserts back into savanna using livestock, which goes against the cow fart thing. So it's very interesting, both sides. I love hearing both sides. Arctic ice increased in volume 50% in 2012 alone, according to this site, right? Now, this is according to this site, yeah. Core measures of the Arctic ice show that it has increased in volume since 2012. More supporting data, simple survey. Cowspiracy. Documentary is so important. All right. Now, it supposedly in 2012, it increased by 50%. This is this argument that they're saying here. Few people have even predicted that global warming would cause whole Arctic ice to melt, which contradicts their version. Okay. Not typed very well, so I don't trust that one. The climate model calculations, this is number 4. Climate models. This is probably the only valid argument I've seen thus far, right? The climate model, when I say valid, the other ones are valid. They're valid to bring up, of course, but they're easily argued against, which we'll get to. Number 4, I actually like this argument because mathematical modeling was one of my strongest suits at uni. The climate model calculations used to predict the effect of global warming have been proven to be flawed, according to this website, which means that the long-term predictions that they have been making are meaningless. Some scientists even argue that any increase in global temperatures could be a natural climate shift. That is the only argument I've seen so far that actually is valid, right? Because what they teach you in mathematical modeling, and I've said this heaps of times on the Gabsmack channel, there's 5. Mathematical models are based upon assumptions. And you never ever extrapolate. So you never take from a model what the future will be. That part is true. The guy proposing that says, why are people even arguing against science? Well, if people aren't legitimately allowed to have the discussion, then conspiracy theories will continue. So it's so important to go through each argument and at least give people the chance to think about it and talk about it instead of shutting them down, even if they may sound ridiculous. I think in terms of persuasion, that is the best way to at least, you hear people's grievances and then you sort of go, okay. So advocates who promote arguments against global warming being real, this is the last argument, point towards all the dates having come and gone where predictions were made about effects that never happened. For example, Al Gore predicted that all Arctic ice would be gone by 2013, but on the contrary, Arctic ice is up by 50% since 2012, supposedly. Okay, so those are the 5 arguments against. Okay, now the conclusion here is that there is a problem lies in the 2 groups using different definitions of how global warming appears in the climate. This is one of the reasons that those advocating that global warming is real now use the term climate change, since it is more reflective of the real issue. The other problem lies in proof and in studies that try to prove whether or not global warming is real. Contrary to public belief, the results of all scientific studies are not conclusive. To be considered proof of a hypothesis, the studies have to be able to be replicated by others and produce the same results. With the global warming studies, analyses of decades of weather data is often used. The first problem is that weather data from 100 years ago wasn't kept to modern standards of evidence. The second problem is that analysis is interpretation. You can really put any spin on it. Okay, that part's a fair point. That doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that analysis in general. This is why some of the arguments for and against whether global warming is real can use the same data and come to different conclusions. All right. So what they have made a case for is to say that there might be a slight chance that it's not real. That this is my interpretation of this whole article. So it wasn't too convincing. Now, let's go to the argument here from skepticalscience.com, which supports climate change. All right. You always wear hats at night. It's very cold here. My hands are freezing, actually, so... okay, so actually, all right, here we go. So now we're going to look at the for and against on this other site. This site says that there is no consensus. Actually, so what they did was they put negatives and they say actually. So actually 97% of climate experts agree humans are causing global warming. That to me, even though I agree that humans are causing global warming, there's a difference between my personal position and the argument. The problem here is that everyone also agreed at one point that the Earth was flat, and they also agreed at one point that the Earth, we had a geocentric model of the universe. Right? So the point is to understand the enemy's argument. Oh, my pleasure, Texas Fred, man. I love that. That's Gabversity, man. Facts don't give a damn about your feelings. That's the whole point. So it's so important to know the other side's argument better than you know your own, right? Because how can you beat them? If you want to beat them, you've got to understand their argument. So that's why some people hear me arguing on the side of climate denial, and they think I'm a climate denier, which is completely not the case at all, right? But the point is, you've got to know that argument really well. So here, right, the argument for climate change is that 97% of climate experts agree. Know your enemy. That's right, exactly, right? And then my response is, well, 97% used to think the Earth was flat, or used to think the Earth was the center, right? So now the next one. The last decade, 2000 to 2009, was the hottest on record. Okay, now that's a fact. It was the hottest on record. But then you will come back as a climate denier and you could say, well, number one, our records only go back 100 years. All right, and they were not as accurate throughout the whole 100 years. Number two, they could say, based on what? Well, that's exactly like, in the sense that you don't know which out of that 97%, which ones have access to empirical data and which ones are viewing the conclusions of those above them. So you don't know exactly. So it's not an argument. In other words, it's not a good argument to support climate change, right? The next one is 2000, 2009, hottest on record. Well, we just said that's our records go back 100 years, number one. On the record of the 10 decades recorded when the Earth was 4.5 of the 10 decades recorded when the Earth. Yeah, that's exactly right. The Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. There's also the different cycles. We have the aphelion and perihelion cycles that fluctuate every 61,000 years, I think. But there was a Macedonian scientist, I think, who came up with this 3 separate cycles, and they all combine once every 400,000 years, and that causes a massive climate shift. So once again, not a good argument, because even though that's true, right, it doesn't convince those on the climate denying side. It's not a good argument to convince. Next one. Models successfully reproduce temperatures since 1900 globally by land, in air, and the ocean. So therefore, models are reliable. Well, there's another problem with that. The problem is that models that predicted populations increasing predicted that as of the 2020s, we would have a population of 20 billion. But now we know that's not true, because the model they used was an exponential equation. We now know it's a logarithmic function. Right? Okay. The warming trend, right, is the same in rural and urban areas measured by thermometers and satellites. Right? So that's a pretty good argument for climate change. Right? Climate change, right, is that there is a warming trend in all areas. We also see a massive rise in acidity of the levels. We see actual data highly consistent with the use of fossil fuels by humans and the rising in the temperature. Now, once again, they could be correlated, not a causal link. So once again, even though it's a very valid argument and it's obvious that we are contributing, right? It does not convince the climate denier, because they can argue back and say, well, they're just both coincidental, or maybe humans are only contributing 1% because volcanoes are contributing 99%, right? All right, animals and plants can adapt is another argument by the climate denier, supposedly. Global warming will cause mass extinctions of species that cannot adapt in short-term scales. Okay, the next one. It hasn't warmed since 1998. That is another climate denying argument. The pro-climate change argument says every part of Earth's climate system has continued warming since 98, with 2015 shattering temperature records. Now that's very interesting, because we just saw on the other site that it has not warmed. You get my great, awesome, Sri Baba, welcome back, right? So it's very interesting, isn't it? Because one side, I don't think opposing sides will ever come to an agreement on climate change. Yeah, I think you're right on that. I don't think it's going to happen. Well, right here, we just have an example, right? One side says it hasn't warmed since 98. The other side says it's been warming every year since 98. All right. Remember, on the other page, Antarctica is gaining ice. On this page, it says satellites measure Antarctica losing land ice at an accelerating rate. Time will tell who was right. Grid parity will make a change. Admiral Purplebeard, that's awesome. All right. Next one. We're heading into an ice age. Probably not while we're alive. Worry about global warming impacts in the next 100 years, not an ice age in over 10,000 years. Okay. Ocean acidification threatens entire marine food chains. Extreme weather isn't caused by global warming is the argument against it. Argument for it is extreme weather events are being made more frequent and worse by global warming. Liran, hello. All right. Some people argue it's only urban heat island effect is cheaper than other people will switch. Well, that's a very good point, because I've heard some people argue that the cost is actually already too high, because if the climate tips, then we're all going to die, basically. This is one argument on the pro side, right? Here's another one. Urban and rural regions show the same warming trend. Okay. Next. Human carbon dioxide is a tiny percentage of CO2 emissions. There you go. Here's another one. Okay, here it is. The natural cycle adds and removes, but there's not enough motivation for corporations to develop it. Yeah. The natural cycle adds and removes CO2 to keep a balance. Here's an argument that actually doesn't get brought up a lot. Humans add extra CO2 without removing any. That's a very interesting point. See, so with the volcanoes add CO2, but that CO2 is added from CO2 that was already absorbed, where humans add CO2 without actually removing the CO2. So they're completely two different things. That's a very, very important argument. So when they say volcanoes add 90%, that is recycled CO2, where humans are adding CO2 that's not recycled, and tons of SO2. See, that argument there is a good one for supporting climate change. Don't plants remove CO2? They do remove CO2, but they would have removed it anyway. In other words, the net addition by humans is a positive one. That's a very good argument. That's probably the best argument I've seen so far for climate change out of everything here so far. Okay. Can you repeat what you said about volcanoes? Yeah, another gentleman here raised a really good point, which was that volcanoes produce, up to 9,000, times more greenhouse gases than humans do. And that's actually true, right? Geologically, that's true. But the difference is that it's spewing out what it has been absorbing, so it's part of the regular cycle, whereas humans are spitting out carbon dioxide that would never have been released. So there is a net positive, yeah, as opposed to a neutral version, yeah. Okay, here, look at Yellowstone, it's all acid pools. Yeah. So, for example, CO2 limits will harm the economy. The benefits of a price on carbon outweigh the costs several times over. That's exactly what we were saying, right? How you define cost. See, that's a bad argument, because how you define cost, it depends on which side you're on, right? Now, okay. All right. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze. Sorry. Ooh, sorry about that. Okay. No natural forcing fits the fingerprints of observed warming except anthropogenic greenhouse gases. All right, here we go. What else have we got here? So that's humidity is falling, Neptune is warming, CO2 is coming from the ocean. Al Gore's TED Talk on grid parity is worth a listen. Okay, I think we might do that on our next lecture. Renewable energy is too expensive. That was a good argument. When you account for all of the costs associated with burning coal and other fossil fuels like air pollution and health effects, in reality, it's cheaper. Anyway, I think it's trying to find some other good. Holy crap. An exponential increase in CO2 will result in a linear increase in temperature. CO2 levels are rising so fast that unless we decrease emissions, global warming will accelerate this century. Deniers are part of the 97%. It's interesting, the data only discuss CO2 from volcanoes. Yeah, that's true. All right. CO2 only causes 35% of global warming. The response is CO2 and corresponding water vapor feedback are the biggest cause of global warming. Okay. Climate change isn't increasing extreme weather damage costs. It's good that they actually discuss the subject openly in uni. Oh man, my pleasure, Slim Grady. See you next time. All right. Now, actually, the uni, it's funny you said that, Liran. The uni is not discussing it. The uni is massively for climate change and has no arguments against it. So they're very condescending. So I went out of my way to find legitimate arguments to at least get people who are on the other side, like the climate denying side. Yeah. You see? Yeah, that's what I mean. This is my friend. This is Gabversity, man. But you're right. Normal unis seem to be so biased. So I thought, screw that. And even though I'm on the side of climate change, it is absolutely, in my opinion, disrespectful to those other people to just talk to them like they're idiots. You got to come up with all the arguments and have a legitimate scientific discussion. How else are you going to motivate anyone to think anything? Anyway, we obviously both agree on that. All right, so that's those two. Now we're going to go to the uni, so you can see the difference between what the uni's saying. Okay. So, here is the title of the uni lecture. You ready? This is the title. Why is it so hard to engage with this topic when the evidence is clear? Why is it so hard to engage when the evidence is clear? That's how the university one starts. Yeah, exactly. Right? You're already gonna piss everyone off, right? Not biased at all. Okay, here we go. Oh my God, everyone's about to get triggered. All right, so human-induced climate change is a demonstrable reality, yet very few people understand the science, nor are aware of its possible consequences. It's too emotional. That's exactly right. And this is supposed to be science, and they're discussing over just exactly. That's exactly right. This is what I mean. And my undergrad experience was completely different. Tons of different opinions expressed on all topics. That's great. Well, mate, you should freaking send that to Jordan Peterson. He's got a website which talks about which unis are actually, Gabversifying. Look at this. Look at the next question. From a common point of agreement. Don't know what that is. Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, at least we can say, well, we can talk about the data. Number one, the data doesn't give you a conclusion. The data is what it is. We can talk about that first and then go up from there. But this is how the uni starts, right? Why is it so hard to understand? That's what it says. Look at this. Why is it so hard to understand? Very few people nor are aware of the consequences. That's what universities have devolved into these days. It's so bad. All right. Yeah, why are you so dumb, man? Like, all right, that's really going to convince about 0% of people. Yeah, so bad. Anyway, so from the article written by Garneau in 2008, climate change is uncertain in its impacts, reach, and extent. So these parts, now that we've gotten their idiocy out of the way, there are some points here that are really good, right? So for example, everyone is so polarized and closed-minded now, it seems. It seems that way. Hence why we have Gabversity and Gabsmacked and Gablife. We try to at least have a discussion. All right. So climate change is uncertain in its impacts, reach, and extent. That's true. It's uncertain. We don't know how bad it's going to be. All right. My argument is that I reckon it's going to be bad. I just don't know how much, right? Insidious and not obvious. Long-term and not immediate, right? International, therefore requiring global collaboration and potentially dangerous consequences. All right, you can argue that. That's actually a fair point, because that's not arguing for or against. That's just saying that, well, it says what it says, right? Okay, here we go. Look at the title of the next slide is Educating Climate Change. My God, trigger points. All right, here we go. Our economy is too closely linked to carbon. Our lifestyles and economy too closely linked to consumption. I heard against is no PNR date. Would they then say climate stability? Fair point. Yeah, well, have a look at this. So this is now just the data, right? We're not point of no return. Ah, that's what you meant. Yes, that would be very convincing, I would say. Growth rate, right, of the economy, right? And this is CO2 emissions, and this is the year. So what they're saying, right? Now, once again, this does not prove or disprove climate change. This is just data which shows that as our economies grew, so did the CO2 emissions. Now that can be true because that's just data. So that can be true, but that does not prove or disprove climate change. So at least I would suggest that at least we can agree on the actual data itself. If someone wants to deny that, I'm not sure where we can go. Okay. Yeah, it's an obvious correlation. Exactly. That's exactly right. So it's exactly right. Nothing else to say on that. Right? Now this is actually, I'm going to show you a cartoon now that they've added. And this cartoon is exactly more people, animals, machines. I mean, exactly like you really need someone to tell you. It sounds like a rant, not science, in the collection of data. I would say that's actually a good point. There could easily be bias in the data, right? But talk about talking down, yeah. There could be bias in the data as well, but it's hard to not look around and realize that everything we're using is producing emissions, right? And I don't think many people on either side would deny that. Have a look at this. If the thing will flip. Come on. There we go. Their wording is very implicitly biased. There's right implicit bias, right? China is such a horrible polluter, like omitting from volcanic data. That's a good point. That's actually a good point. But what they're talking about is emissions of carbon dioxide, not the presence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But you see, this is what I mean. That's a good point. And then I responded and clarified. So then we have no problem. Whereas a university lecturer would go, what are you, a chimp? You know what I mean? So here's the cartoon, right? Have a look at this. And SO2, yeah. All right. China is such a horrible polluter. All they care about is rapid economic growth. Caught fudging data. That's exactly true. Increasing industrial production as cheaply as possible with no regard for the environment. Where was your purse made? But it's cute and it was so cheap. So that's going to convince people, isn't it? All right. You're right. I'm triggered. This is why. Anyway, unbelievable. I wonder if they're going to mark me down. Conclusion equals capitalism. No, I'm sure they're correct. Throw your iPhone in the trash. That is good. That was a good one, Troy. Our mindset is one of natural resource use. We have a throwaway society, not cyclic. We are set in our ways, very hard to modify behavior. Behavioral change limited by high barriers, especially when times are good. Onus on scientists to build cast iron case for change. Like, for example, the last one they think is a problem. They think, look at this. I kid you not. Have a look at this, right? It says problems, educating climate change problems, onus on scientists to build cast iron case for change. Yes, it is onus on us to make a cast iron case for change. Yes. What did you think was going to happen? Right? Regular humans are just going to drop everything because. Okay. Most people do not experience how dare people want proof. I know, beyond a reasonable doubt, yeah. Very few people have been to the Arctic, seen a glacier, experienced a cyclone, visited a developing nation, read a scientific paper. I would say that scientists are, or whatever this is, this uni or whatever, they are the worst. They're actually enemies of climate change, because let's assume climate change is real, right? They're actually not convincing anyone, so they're making it worse. All right. So now they're saying that it's not the population's fault. They're not feeling the heat from their politicians. They sound like lunatics. They really do. This here is asking for government involvement. Now, bear in mind, my personal position is that I would love government involvement to force that to happen, right? But that's in an ideal world. We don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where we need to have a discussion with everyone in the room, right? We're all on this lifeboat together. I can't just shoot you and then, and screw you. You know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. So in pragmatically, that does not work. And we can't rely on politicians, because politicians in general seem to me to be either corrupt, stupid, or both. Okay, you're going to get triggered on this next video. I'm really sorry. I'm warning you in advance. You're going to get triggered on this one. Denial. Head in the sand. Man-made climate change. Oh, someone's triggered. My dear, this is what they're teaching your daughter in uni. They'll come up with the proper sections. Troy is on fire today, man. That is so funny. All right, here is our next section of the lecture. Are you ready? It's called The Psychology of Climate Change Denial. We are now going to understand the psychology of the denial. Comprehension and perception, which is not, that's exactly right. Denial, apart from being the longest river in Egypt, is exactly proof of the bias. That's exactly right. That is exactly correct. And once again, you're talking to someone who is convinced of climate change, right? But I am never, ever, ever going to come to you and say that, right? People on the right claim the earth is warming up, but mostly due to natural cause. I called you flat earth denial. Exactly, right? Talk about arrogance. And arrogance is exactly antithetical to knowledge. They are exactly competing views. They don't work together. All right, so sampling, attribute substitution, weather for climate. Okay, so 3 reasons, 3 examples, at least I think that's what they claim. Yeah, that seems to be the thing now. The going thing is that, yes, it is getting warmer, but it's not us, yeah. Which is, like I said, I don't agree with that position, but it's a legitimate position to start at so that we can try and get to a conclusion. I mean, why is it that something so simple, like what I just said, is something that is so hard to hear? Anyway, so example 1, public confusion over the causes of the millennium drought. Example 2, record sea ice, and the earth is 10,000 years old, that's right. Record sea ice extent versus ice shelf breakup in Antarctica. Okay. And the next one, UK study in 2011 by someone called Spence. Respondents with experience of flooding more likely to express concern over climate change feel it is less uncertain and have greater willingness to reduce energy usage. So in other words, you increase temperatures. That's right. That's exactly right. I tell people, go and listen to that guy, Alan Savory, I think. He's 81 years old. The guy's, what he said was awesome. He, talking about how he's able to reverse desertification with increased agriculture. Insensitivity to bias. Savory. Savory. Look at this. Oh my God. All right. This, I'm sorry. You're going to get triggered for the rest of this lecture. All right. Here we go. Insensitivity to bias, disproportionate media coverage of skeptical views. Alan, so that's him. That's the one, yeah. Anchoring on irrelevant information. Example, CO2 is a harmless gas. This is what we call the straw man argument, right? This is belittling your enemy, which is the worst thing to do. That is why Trump won, because the idiots, the stupid, retarded morons on my side belittled Trump supporters. Yeah, let's examine the psychos, exactly. Absolute idiots. This is what I wrote in my blog. I said, this is why Trump will win. You are belittling legitimate points of views of half of the American population. You don't have to agree with them to realize that they are legitimate views. I don't like guns, but lots of people do. So you have to respect that they do. Like, Jesus. Anyway. Okay. Now, Jesus. Anyway, I just feel like I wish if I had, I don't know, if I ran the Democrat Party, it would be a very different thing. But I'd probably kick out all of those maniac fake leftist bastards. Anyway, so CO2 concentration of the atmosphere is only the DNC imploded. What a disappointment. Anyway. We'll get away from that. Energy equivalent to 14,400 Hiroshima bombs. We have guns because our militias do. Look, yeah, I'm not going to get into the argument because, like, you have valid arguments, and I don't have to agree. But we might even have that debate at some point at another lecture. Because there are all right, comprehension. Climate change trends are hard to discern above natural variability. Human lifespan is too short to truly experience the trend. This is one argument. Therefore, hard to appreciate the long-term consequences. Climate change also often seems to be relevant only to long-term decision-making. Scale is important. So now what they've done is they've got a picture of a frog inside a boiling thing, and they've put a Trump supporter inside there. Okay. That's exactly right. They're simplifying a complex problem. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I know, wait, nothing else matters but the cartoons. They got me. They had me at hello. Public opinion is guided by, they've put trusted sources. The media, friends and family, political leaders, loudest voices, what they need, read on the internet. I don't really think any of that's true. I think people are guided by their own biases. 12% of the New South Wales population consider climate change to be a dominant environmental issue, even though many more agree that it exists. I think so. I think it's the child who made this, yeah. So by the way, as I said to Boss Briggs's daughter is starting university soon. This is the type of shit she's going to have to be dealing with. Climate change spans a very wide range of scientific disciplines, including climatology, meteorology, physics, chemistry, geology, blah, 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 cryology, quaternary studies, systems and process science. Okay. Climate change science is complex. We're sorry, it's a bit too smart for you little guys. Sorry about that. She's screwed. So you know what's funny? I have to do an assignment on climate change. And I am going to rip apart the climate change arguments, even though I'm on the side of climate change. And the problem is, it's going to degrade my marks, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. Most of us are guided by the media and not scientists. I don't think most people are guided by the media. I think the media is unbelievably propagandistic, and most people know that. I would say almost all Bernie Sanders supporters and Trump supporters both realize the media is bullshit. It's a propagandist machine. Oh, there's another cartoon. Do you want to see it? No, I'm going to skip the next cartoon because it's really... All right, we've got framing. Used to organize, contain, and present the theme of a news event. Many interpretation filters, including experience, education, potential bias, conscious or unconscious. Ooh, unconscious bias of the journalist. Whoops. Select and highlight certain facets of events or issues and make connections among them so as to promote particular interpretation. So now they're against the media, supposedly. Primary motivation to sell papers and make money, therefore not necessarily targeting the truth. Tend to chase the controversial issues, headlines designed to highlight controversy rather than agreement. But they all supported Hillary Clinton. What are they trying to say here? All right, let's look at the media triangle, my friends. The media triangle. The media contain value messages. All media are constructions. Production audience. Different audiences will interpret media messages differently. Each media has its own unique techniques, forms, styles, and conventions. The media have special interests. I swear to you, all of these arguments can be used to explain why what do you call it? Why people think Trump is Hitler. It's exactly the same thing. All right. A good scientist is a skeptical one. Skepticism is the basis of peer review. This is good. That's actually a good point. When publishing new science, every scientist has to run the gauntlet of their peers. They need to persuade their peers that something is valid. But skepticism does not mean denial. Skepticism doesn't mean denial. I don't know many people on the right who are climate change deniers. I think they're climate change skeptics. They're just not completely sold on the idea. And that's straw man again, that's right. I don't blame, people for not being convinced of climate change. I blame those who are unable to convince them. That's where the problem lies. Maybe they were deniers a long while ago, but not now. Yeah, I would say that. I would agree with that, yeah. Okay, so for example here, let's have a look. Okay, it's happening, but it's not us causing it. Natural variation, sun, unknown, some other crackpot idea, cosmic rays. Okay, we may have had an impact, but it's small. It's not as bad as scientists say. Scientists are exaggerating impact to gain research funding. Too much uncertainty. We can deal with it. Models are wrong. See, okay, here are the good arguments, right? Here are arguments that I actually think are valid for the other side. Okay, but it's not us causing it. When I say valid, it's valid to begin here. This is not unreasonable. That is not an unreasonable claim to make, right? If I'm a scientist and I'm coming to someone for the first time and saying, hey, climate change is real, and they said to me, well, I'm not sure, could be this. They could be wrong, but that is a legitimate position to start with. Okay. The next, too much uncertainty. Models are wrong. Models are wrong is a very good argument. What does AI say? What does AI say? Too expensive to address. Okay. Uncertain outcomes. Riverina Murray. Okay. Yeah, and they are putting in a list that is supposed to be ridiculous. I know, it's so offensive. Oh. River red gums are already significantly stressed. More changes to rainfall, drought periods, and fire seasons will threaten this ecosystem. Once again, sound is static. Oh. Once again, I agree with this. I agree that more changes to rainfall, drought, and fire seasons will threaten this ecosystem. I also think climate change skeptics would agree with that. I think where we disagree is where the cause is and whether we can fix it. For example, I think we can, and we need to do what it takes to do it, right? That's my personal opinion, right? But that is nowhere as of yet obvious in evidence. I buy into man-made climate change, but this is a very biased review of the subject. Yes. Okay. Here we go. It hasn't warmed since 1998, and air temperature. Okay. All right. Now here we go. So here's another one. There are two graphs. Remember how we read on the other website that it hasn't warmed since 1998, right? And then some people said no, it's been going up since 1998. The reason is because they changed the graph. Okay. Now, the one that says it hasn't warmed was measuring air temperature anomaly. Air temperature anomaly, right? So if you run air temperature anomalies, right? So where the peaks are, right? The peaks, there is no increase. Right? But if you look at the surface temperature has been an increase since the Industrial Revolution. So the air temperature has not increased. The surface temperature has increased. Now, once again, that does not prove or disprove climate change, but that explains the argument. So both you guys, on whichever side you may lie, you now know the other person's argument, right? So have a look. This here, so we just need to eliminate surfaces. Shouldn't other elements be also taken into consideration? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going through each argument, right, piece by piece, between surface and air. Well, that's a very good question. I actually don't know yet. So this is the air, right? The air temperature sort of does this, okay? And we can see that CO2 levels have been going up, but air temperature has not, okay? It's roughly through there. But this is surface temperature. Surface temperature has been going like this until the Industrial Revolution, and then it's just been going up like crazy. Ships pollute ocean with CO2. Okay. See, they're both, that's also true, right? So far, it's obvious that there are people here on both sides, and they're both actually giving really good positions. See, that part is convincing to me. Now, if that doesn't convince other people, that's fine. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to look at the data, and then you decide on your own. That's the whole point of living in humanity. And that's why when I say I'm pro-socialism, That part there is what I mean about as a society together, we need to reach a consensus, right? So there it is. That's the surface temperature. Okay, this is air temperature at surface temperature, and it started at the Industrial Revolution. Now, once again, that could be coincidence. It could be coincidence that the surface temperature has increased exponentially since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. What about water temperature? It includes both. It includes the whole surface of the earth, land and water. So once again, that is not going to convince someone who's a climate skeptic, and I don't expect it to. I'm not looking for that. But this is a piece of information that will help you if you are a climate skeptic, right? One of the first I've seen. That's awesome. I'm glad. That means a lot, because that's the whole point. More light absorption, yeah. So what I actually want to strengthen the climate skeptics' argument. The reason is because when you strengthen their argument, it will force you to have to come up with a better argument. And the best argument will then win. Pollution from rivers. Okay. So now, if you're a climate skeptic, right, and you have every right, as far as I'm concerned, to be one, there's no problem from my side, right? What I say to you is that you now need to come up with some justification, right? And I'm sure there is one. I'm not saying there isn't one at all. I'm saying that is now a pro-climate person, climate change person will come to you and give you this, right? They're going to say to you this, okay? Which is the surface temperature increase. So you now need to be prepared for them giving you that argument and need to know how to argue back, okay? So the argument back in this case would be that why are we using surface temperature compared to the air? Condescension is not an argument. That's an awesome line. What year does this measurement start? That's a good argument. That's a good argument. It starts in 1790. 1790, and have a look at this. What's interesting is that it went down even further in the early 1900s, right? And so it started rising in the Industrial Revolution, and then it went down again, and then it went up from the 1940s, and then it went consistently up from the 1940s, and it's never gone back down. So there could be, how accurate was the surface temperature analysis 250 years ago? Exactly. That's another good argument. I still question the geographical source of the data, worldwide data. Exactly. Another good point. These are really good points, right? These are good arguments. And that forces the pro-climate change people to actually now have to find out the location of all of those data points and how accurate the measurements were, right? Because remember that the variation that I just showed you is 1 degree. 1 degree. Have a look. Right? That's true. It could be by geological data, right? But look at that. That's 0. Look at that. Up there is 0.8 of a degree. Okay? So that fluctuation is 0.8 of a degree. Okay? Now, what Troy said was pretty good in the sense that the margin of error could be half a degree. It could be 1 degree. And then if the error is 1 degree, right, then this whole data is meaningless. And what Sri Baba said was that if the data points that they're using each has a margin of error, then all those margins of error add up, and it could be 1 degree as well, right? So that does not help my side, because as you guys know, my position, but that's okay. That is the point. Exactly what we're doing. This is awesome. Imagine if uni is actually taught this way. Okay, now I'm going to show you another one. Okay. I'm going to show you now the next graph, which is, right, I'm not sure what the margin of error is in this context. Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know. That's the thing. It could be that as they're taking the measurements, the actual measuring device, has a margin of error of a certain amount. Especially like what Troy said 250 years ago. You don't know. Okay, so ocean heat content. Okay, ocean heat content. Here's an interesting one. We've got the change, and this is in energy. Okay, so the energy content has gone from 0 to 20 joules, which is, I don't even know what that is in calories, but it's about 5 calories or something, right? So if you have a look at this, okay, this is from 0 to 700 meters. So what you can see here is that the surface of the oceans has heated up like crazy compared to the ocean underneath, right? And that suggests that the heat is coming from above. And if it's coming from above, once again, that is consistent with increased heat in the atmosphere. Now, to me, that means that climate change is probably real, but it's not proof. It is not proof that climate change is real. It's consistent with it, right? Which means it's correlated. It could be other factors, okay? Once again, so there you go. Now, let's go to the next one. The solar variations of the sun could just be Poseidon. It could be Poseidon, you don't know. Okay, so now we have solar cycle variations. Have a look at this. These are solar cycle variations. All right. Solar flare index, solar, okay, irradiance, which is, and it's come down. So it looks like this, it's moving in a form of a sine wave. Right. Okay. Here we go. Consensus is not a requirement for good science. Okay, this guy Oreskes. Hey, Just Simon. You missed out on a great bloody lecture, Just Simon. Good to see you, my friend. Oreskes, 928 papers published between 93 and 03 with keyword climate change. Zero disagreement with consensus position. Cook, similar study on 12,000 abstracts between 91, agreed. 97% agreed. All right, here's my problem with that argument. Now, number one, for those who've just come in, I am pro-climate change. But I think that our side has done a very bad job of giving credibility to the climate skeptics, because the climate skeptics could be correct. Absolutely could be correct. Even though I don't think that, it doesn't mean that it's not true. Yeah, I like the correlation with the Industrial Revolution. That one, if the measurements are correct, yes, that is a good one. Yes, I like that one. Okay, so the argument that 97% of climate scientists agree, to me, is a very bad argument. Because as I've said before in this lecture and before, 97% of scientists used to think that the Earth was flat. They also used to think that the solar system was geocentric and not heliocentric, right? So that is not a good argument, okay? Is correlation causation in this case? Bingo, we were just saying that it's, at the moment, all of the evidence is correlation so far, that what we've done in this lecture. So as I said, you know, it doesn't matter which side you're on. We have only seen correlation so far. Yes. Okay. Here is another skeptical argument, which is actually Troy brought this up. The temperature record is flawed. Yeah. Okay. The temperature record is flawed. So now what we have is measurements from 1960 with a margin of error of 1%. This is from 1960 until 2010. Okay? And what they did is they took measurements from rural stations, urban stations, and all stations in China. So rural and urban stations in the US and all stations in China, and land box data. 1% is that all. In the next one I'm about to show you, in this one here. Right. So here you go. Okay. So what's interesting is that climate has gone up, right, from 1960 until 2010 in every single region. Now, normally, right, if there wasn't global warming, right, then you would have a warmth in one place and a cooling in another, right? But here, in every single location, it's all gone up and all in the same way. Once again, what margin of error is? Sorry, okay. Sorry, just to explain. All right, so let's say that I'm measuring Liran's height, right? Now, if Liran is 6 foot tall, let's just say, right? The ruler that you're using to measure has to be able to measure at least to the nearest inch, to get an accurate measurement. If your measurement goes to the nearest foot, then you don't know if he's really 5.5 feet or 6.5 feet, right? Because the measurement is not completely accurate, if that makes any sense. Or it's like filling up a cup of water. If you don't have the measurements on the side, you don't know if you filled up exactly a cup or if it's a bit less or a bit more. So the lower the margin of error, the better. It means you have a much more accurate reading. Does that sort of help? Anyway, fingers crossed that actually helps. If it doesn't, ask me again. All right. So what we saw here, we saw the rise, okay, from 1960 until 2010. Well, that's exactly right. No one knows. Who knows? They say that the margins of error were less than 10%, but how does that help anybody? Like we don't know. That's the problem. All right. So here we go. Here's another one. Right? For this, it is. That is not very assuring. No, it's not. So what we've seen now, we've seen that there is a lot of data suggesting that there is warming to some degree, or at least it's consistent with warming, but it does not prove that it's man-made so far. Okay? Now someone's going to hear that out of context and think I'm actually a climate skeptic, but that's not the point. The point is that any interesting thing to do is to try and manipulate temperature data to prove the opposite. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We should actually get great input by your viewers. Yeah, they're awesome. They're awesome. I love my viewers. I've said this on Gabsmacked. All of our channels are nothing without my viewers. Okay, next one. Is it volcanoes? Sorry, we went too fast. Sorry, 1 second. On this graph here, right? Now the thing is that is consistent with global warming. 1790 roughly they started measuring, but this one here is a very accurate one, and that's from 1960 until 2010. Okay, now 1960 until 2010 there's been a rise, but once again that is not long enough to prove anything for the skeptics. So I would not use that to try and convince a skeptic, because it's very easy to argue against that. You can say, well, let's 1960 to 2010. Right. Okay, the next one. Is it volcanoes? Now, I remember someone, I don't know if they're still here, I think it was Texas Fred, who said about the volcanoes, or Captain Purplebeard or something. How many times? Exactly, that's exactly right. That's exactly what the skeptic would say. And that is, it's a legitimate response. Even though I don't agree with it, it's a legitimate response, 100%. It's a legitimate response. I can't argue against that, right? So, when was Tambora? Gab makes me think out of the box. Yeah, that's not always a good thing. All right. Oh, by the way, does anyone want a Pompous mug? I've got to show you. Here you go. I've got one left. I ordered 7. I've sold 6. If you want one. And on the back, it's got our site. Gabsmacked. All right. How many times must global volcanic degassing be multiplied to match anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions? Hey, that's, by the way, the artwork was by Miss Kasha, who is on the site now. So many thanks to her. It's good. I made $270 Australian from these, and it cost me $250 to get them all out, roughly. So it was good. It was basically cost neutral, which I'm very happy with. You know, I was very glad. Yeah, Miss Kasha is amazing. So we're going to auction off your painting, Miss Kasha. And I'm thinking what we do is we'll auction it off, and half will go to you and half will go to the book. How's that? Unless you just prefer to scope and auction it yourself, which is also fine. It's your artwork. Okay, so how many times must global volcanic degassing be multiplied? Blah, blah, blah. Current annual anthropogenic emission rate is 35 gigatons per year. All to the book. Well, my dear, you are a sweetheart if you do that. No, not all to the book. I'll have to send you a cup if you put a link to some of your art. Absolutely. Well, message me on Facebook if you can give me a photo of the painting, because what I'll do is I'll use that photo to tweet out and let them know that the auction will come up, and I'll figure out how to do the auction. Okay, so here is the argument of volcanoes, right? Hey, the Dome Father, man, we missed you. All right, so the argument of volcanoes, which someone brought up an hour ago, is that volcanoes spit out so much more carbon dioxide than what we do as humans. Now, that's what the skeptic would say, and that's a fair point, right? But the argument from the climate scientist or someone who supports climate change, it's only 4 a.m. The argument for it is that is recycled carbon dioxide. In other words, that is the natural cycle of the earth. It's only spitting out the carbon dioxide that is being absorbed, right? So it's like it's a continuous cycle. But the carbon dioxide, yeah, and then you say pH directly correlates with volcanism, yeah. So then, but what they say is that human-produced carbon dioxide is not recyclable. So even though it's only less than 1% of what volcanoes spew out, let's just say, that 1% is actually adding to the earth as opposed to volcanoes, which is just spitting out what are already absorbed, right? So that's the argument. That's a pretty good argument, I think, for both sides. Okay, now what we're going to look at is complexity of the science. How can the general public be expected to understand and interpret all that climate change science is? That is so, what is the word? Condescending. Not recycling. Good question. Because that is carbon that would otherwise have not been released. That's the argument from that side. So if humans were not here, that carbon would never have been released. Whereas volcanoes erupt irrespective, and then it gets absorbed again irrespective without us. That's that. Yeah, we're a nut producer. All right. Speaking about Islam makes people a bit weird sometimes. Man, imagine doing that on Gabversity. We'll get shut down. All right. That is arguing a negative logic fail. Great channel, first visit. Hey, welcome. Maybe you should do one as well on climate change. All right. So how can the general public... So we're talking, number one, what we did, we've gone through, and no one is around, doesn't make noise. What we've done is, so just to catch up on those who've come through, doesn't make noise. That's a good one. We went through all of the legitimate arguments that support climate skepticism. And then we went through all the arguments that support climate change. And then we came into the uni, which is so unbelievably biased. And I'll show you what I mean. Show Liran. Do you have a name in Brax? I didn't even know. Well, I know your name in... Yeah, I do. I'll send you... Okay, thanks. Thank you. I'll send it to Liran. Yep, I'll send it. Okay, have a look at this. All right. How can the general public be expected to understand and interpret all that climate change science is? The poor public, they're such, yeah, gotcha. How can their little brains, us idiots, those peasants, yeah, exactly. They're worst. Okay, here is the activities. All right, this one you're going to laugh. This is the skeptics' activities according to the uni, right? Have a look here. Cherry picking data, highlighting apparent scientific debate, posing straw men, which is exactly what these guys have been doing, presenting alternatives that have been discounted by science, denial of evidence rather than true skepticism. Yes, if we were all just obedient, then we'd have no problem. You know what's funny? That's sort of true. If everyone just listened to the Soviet Union, we wouldn't have a problem. North Korea, no problem. All right. So that was the lecture on climate change, quote unquote, denial. That was a lot of fun, actually. I'm actually surprised at how civilized it was. We actually did pretty well. I know, eh? It's so we would be dead, no problem. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Great. That's hilarious. You made it on time. Unconditional surrender. Ooh, Oh, thank you very much, Boss Briggs. You guys too. I loved it. Um, I love it. I absolutely love, as you know, facts don't give a shit about our feelings. We go through both sides and we discuss it. All right, guys, that was it on our lecture. Remember, facts don't care about your feelings, and we will have another lecture on climate change tomorrow or whenever. And now I'm going to go back to quantum mechanics. All the best. Periscope doesn't care about my feelings.